Why are you here in Jordan? Why is it so important to you?
Almost 2 years ago now, I made a series called the Sussex-Windsor Files, and it was actually inspired, or the idea came to me right after Meghan and Harry's tour, faux royal tour, the pointless one, to Nigeria. In parts 1 and 2 of that series, which I highly recommend you watch, I think it's a 5 to 6 part series. So if you're interested in all the things that Edward and Wallace and now Meghan and Harry have done, and of course in Meghan and Harry's case continue to do, to diminish the monarchy, whether intentionally or not, and also how far the monarchy is willing to bend to cover up these things, do check out that series. We will be revisiting a few points made in that series here today as well. In part 1 of that series, the primary focus was how these two couples, almost 100 years apart, in their apparent desperation to establish a rival court and to be seen as royalty, put themselves in incredibly precarious situations that almost always end up compromising the monarchy's integrity, along with their own, of course. You know, what little integrity these people have/had. And now, in a surprising and random twist of events, Harry and Meghan have decided that less than a week after the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, and in the midst of an Epstein shitstorm, now was the best time for yet another seemingly pointless faux royal humanitarian tour to the Middle East. And by the way, when I say surprising, that's not to say that after the epic fails that were the Nigerian and Colombian tours of 2024, Harry and Meghan would never embark on a faux royal tour ever again.
My country.
And that's not to say that Harry and Meghan, who have both been quite politically vocal in the past, using their titles, would never repeat that mistake again. Because we all know by now, having been in this toxic relationship with them for the last 5 to 6 years or so, that Harry and Meghan's signature move is actually repeating the same mistakes over and over again. So what I mean by surprising is that really no one saw this coming. I know I didn't. Normally they like a lot of fanfare, and these things are announced a couple of weeks beforehand, so the media headlines can be dominated. But this was really a surprise. For today, I don't really want to talk about the list of glaringly hypocritical things that they have done in this short 2-day trip, such as Meghan standing by the bedside of a child while her own father languishes in the Philippines, because to me that's been said and done. Meghan and Harry are broken records, and thus our commentary tends to become a broken record itself, and quite frankly, that bores me to tears. But here's the ultimate question, and here's what's always interested me, as displayed in the Sussex-Windsor Files. Why were they there? Not in the sense of what were they doing there, they're useless, but more to trying to answer whether this was purely a selfish PR trip, or whether, as we discussed 2 years ago, certain people and organizations still view them as useful idiots. First of all, before we get into the trip, I'd like to start off by making an observation. It's about Meghan and Harry, yes, but it's really more about Meghan. Meghan Markle has a very predictable cycle or pattern that predates her meeting Harry. She starts off with either a political endeavor or an entertainment one, and whichever one doesn't work, she swaps one out for the other. We know in her youth, she tried to break into acting with the help of her father. She failed, and so she went to Argentina, where she tried to crack into politics, before failing there and coming back to Hollywood, where she tried again with Deal or No Deal, until she somehow landed Suits. Then after getting Suits, at some point she probably realized she was just a 2-bit fluff piece, and so she used her alleged sugar daddy / much older rich man friend, Mr. Fitzpatrick, to get into the UN. She failed there, focused on her acting again, landed a couple of failed Hallmark roles, weaseled her way into World Vision and One Young World before meeting and marrying Harry, thereby dropping each and every one of these organizations faster than you can say Markled. And if you look back at the last couple of years, literally just 2024 and 2025 and now 2026, You can see this pattern clearly playing out yet again. So 2024 was the year in which they really didn't have much going for them. They weren't releasing anything in terms of entertainment, and they really hunkered down on the whole humanitarian spiel with the Archwell Parents Network initiative. May it rest in peace. It's been, pushed off to someone else to deal with. And of course, the 2 faux royal tours. The reason that these tours and humanitarian efforts were halted, basically almost non-existent last year in 2025, was because the political/humanitarian efforts failed. And so Meghan, in classic Meghan style, switched gears and focused on the entertainment aspect, which we now know a year later also failed. And here we are yet again, starting off this seemingly never-ending, what I call Markle cycle.
I don't see this as a political issue. From my standpoint, it's just a humanitarian issue.
Speaking of predictable patterns, in yet another very predictable move, Meghan and Harry's camp were quick to point out that this trip to Jordan was not a politically motivated one, but rather a humanitarian one. But here's the problem. You can say, or rather they can say, as much as they want that what they're saying or doing is not political in nature. And let's face it, many times people genuinely mean it. I myself, this video being a prime example, delve into topics that are highly political, but I always give off these disclaimers which don't work, and I've stopped giving them since, that hey, just because we're talking about this topic, it doesn't mean I'm showing my politics. I'm actually quite apolitical. But all this to say, some of us genuinely mean it when we say, hey, this is not a political angle. Okay, we're just talking about this, we're commenting, maybe raising awareness, etc., etc., etc. But the problem with Meghan and Harry, Meghan in particular, but Harry just tags along as he always does, is that they are not that type of person. Their track record, unfortunately, speaks for itself. But let's say it's a political stance. Normally, one would say, so what? They're allowed to voice their politics, but those pesky titles. We all know that the British royal family is meant to be apolitical.
Look, there's certainly a precedent amongst my husband's family and the royal family of not having any involvement in politics.
So despite their efforts and attempts to make this look like they're just private citizens caring about the world and the plight of people in the Middle East, private citizens aren't normally invited to Jordan by the World Health Organization and hosted effectively by the British ambassador to Jordan. I'm sure he got a talking to behind the scenes, and we'll get into that whole government reaction thing later on in the video. Speaking of private citizens, I actually do find it interesting that they chose to describe themselves in that way for this trip. It's almost as though it's a disclaimer of sorts. Like, hey, don't come after us. So that tells me that despite their protestations that this is not a political stance and it's a humanitarian visit, they know exactly how this trip looks. Hence the disclaimer. Because as I said, they're not really in the habit of reminding us that they're private citizens. The official story is that they have been invited by the World Health Organization for goodness knows what reason other than eyeballs, I guess. I mean, maybe they tried for William and Catherine and couldn't get them. I don't know. But honestly, given how useless the World Health Organization is, much like its parent organization, the UN, I really am not surprised that they are collaborating with the likes of these two because, useless meet useless. There might be a financial link here because apparently last September, Archwell announced a $500,000 donation to projects supporting injured children from Gaza and Ukraine. This included a $200,000 donation to the World Health Organization. So maybe the organization wanted to show Meghan and Harry where their money was going, or perhaps Meghan and Harry wanted to see for themselves, which valid, I guess, but did you need to bring an entire entourage of cameras and alert the media for that? They went to hospitals where, much like Sarah Ferguson, we're talking about these Sussex-Windsor Files. I even made a video called the York Sussex Files last week. Have a look at it if you haven't already. But Sarah used wounded children as props to bolster her own humanitarian image as well. And honestly, the World Health Organization, in my eyes at least, is just as guilty of this. Why bring cameras into hospitals? I know they ask permission from these people, but the imbalance of power negates most of the consent that's given, in my opinion. This isn't a photo op for these people. This is reality for them. This is their everyday life. They don't get to pose for a few seconds and then jet off back to Montecito and present some meaningless award, dolled up to the nines. It really does remind me of that infamous Meghan quote where she wrote way back in the 2010s about how, she's got 2 feet in different worlds. She's whisked off from red carpet to being a humanitarian, back to the red carpet. I guess she really is living the dream. But whenever I see these photos taken, I just think, whatever happened to basic human dignity? What if these people don't want their photos up there later down the line, when perhaps things get better and they realize, you know what? I'd like that taken down, thanks. But too bad, you've already signed off your likeness to us. We're going to keep it up here and promote ourselves and our own selfish agendas using photos and videos of you or your child or your sibling, your relative, in your darkest moment. Then they visited the Quest Scope Youth Center, which is actually the perfect venue to illustrate how things always get political, no matter what your intentions are, and how things can get really messy. So why is Quest Scope in particular a sticky point, a problem for Meghan and Harry? Well, first of all, it's important to figure out what it is, because I honestly hadn't heard of it before. It is a youth center that was launched in a refugee camp in 2013, and its purpose is to provide in-depth training and support in the management skills of entrepreneurship, conducting business feasibility studies, drafting business plans, and developing pitches to launch small enterprises. It basically aims to help refugees seeking to gain critical marketable skills, English language proficiency, and trauma-informed counseling. So, ostensibly, on the face of it, very good intentions. The problem is, as I'd mentioned, people dig things up, especially when famous or controversial people are involved. So that's exactly what happened. People did some digging into this organization, and it turns out that some staff members who work for Quest Scope made public social media posts from their personal accounts, but they were made public. Obviously, that's how people could see them, with some being pro-Palestine, natural for that part of the world, but some apparently were pro-Hamas. This sparked outrage amongst people who then claimed that this is irrefutable evidence that Meghan and Harry are, at worst, pro-Hamas, or at best, ignorant fools who failed to do their due diligence. Here's what Honest Reporting had to say. Ahead of the trip to Jordan, a source close to the Sussexes reportedly told British media that the visit was not political and should not be interpreted as taking sides. That assertion now warrants scrutiny. When global public figures publicly platform an organization whose staff have shared material aligned with a designated terrorist group, neutrality is no longer a shield. It becomes a question of vetting and judgment. Were Harry and Meghan aware of the social media histories of individuals connected to the NGO? Did their team conduct due diligence before lending royal prestige to the organization? No, they didn't. My aside, by the way. If not, why not? If they were aware and proceeded regardless, what message does that send? Humanitarian engagement does not grant immunity from scrutiny. In a region where symbolism carries enormous weight and propaganda travels faster than fact, public association has consequences. Normally, I would say you can't possibly research every single person associated with an organization that you would like to publicly affiliate yourself with. But I think I can confidently say that were this an actual official royal visit, let's say William and Catherine, then their team would have done just that. But regardless of what the answer is, whether they conducted their due diligence or whether they knew about this and proceeded anyway, it has the same effect, which is giving off a certain image due to all the room left for speculation, which never reflects positively on them, but also on the monarchy, which their titles, whether they like it or not, affiliate them with. There's been a trend in my last few videos. I think literally the last 4 to 5 videos I made, I must have mentioned at least once that history is always repeating itself. In 1937, Wallace and Edward accepted an invitation by the German Labour Front to tour Germany, presumably so that the Nazis could demonstrate how Germany overcame economic strife post-World War I. The story goes that Edward wanted to learn about these measures so that he would one day return to Britain as, quote, the champion of the working class, end quote. The exact motive underlying the trip on Edward and Wallace's side has been up for speculation. Some say it was Edward's greatest desire to give Wallace a royal experience. During that trip, Hitler actually referred to her as Your Royal Highness, which she was not. Some say Edward wanted to rejuvenate his standing and prove to his bride that he lost nothing. He had apparently personally said that it was to strengthen Anglo-German relations post-World War I by swaying Hitler with his charms and avoiding a second war. Yeah, how well did that work out for you, buddy? And yet, there were others who thoroughly believed that Edward was fully in on the Nazi plans to topple his brother and to reinstate Edward as their German-friendly king. Whatever the case was, that trip did not reflect well on the British monarchy and, of course, the UK government at large. In fact, the monarchy took all measures to distance itself from Wallace and Edward, particularly after this trip. The king was enraged, declaring that they were never to be hosted or entertained in any official capacity in any embassy, which, ironically, the opposite is what exactly ended up happening with Meghan and Harry this time. They were hosted by the British ambassador. Furthermore, in a string of communications between the king's former private secretary, Alec Harding, and senior British diplomat Sir Robert Vansittart, the disdain towards Edward and Wallace's unofficial and unsanctioned tour was clear. Harding wrote that under no circumstances were the couple to be treated as King George's representatives in whatever country they visit. Vansittart agreed and replied that the tours, prearranged without a word to the UK, I'll stop here and say Meghan and Harry have claimed that they did notify Buckingham Palace before going ahead with it, so there's that. But Edward and Wallace didn't, and it was a bit too much. With Harding then stating that nothing should be done to make them appear other than what they are. Private stunts for publicity purposes. They can obviously bring no benefit to the workers themselves. Which is, again, exactly what we always say about Meghan and Harry and their pointless tours. What benefit could this bring anyone other than a publicity stunt? Of course, it is worth noting that Meghan and Harry were not, in this instance, directly invited by Hamas. So on that front, it's not a direct comparison, yes. The World Health Organization is not comparable to the Nazis, after all. In Edward's case as well, his pro-German, I will say, if not pro-Nazi, if we're going to be charitable, his pro-German tendencies were very well known. In Meghan and Harry's case, it's not as clear because this is what's confusing me. Here they are in Jordan and clearly affiliating themselves with Gaza and being pro-Gaza when they had previously publicly announced cutting ties with an organization because I believe its founder wrote a blog post in which she made it clear that she was pro-Palestine. So the messages are definitely mixed. And people actually expect them to do their due diligence and look into what the staff members of an organization which they will be visiting for an hour or so are saying and doing in their own time. In this instance, there hasn't been an official statement put out by the British government regarding Meghan and Harry's visit. They haven't directly attempted to distance themselves from it. But as per the Daily Mail, a source stated that the British ambassador didn't actually invite Meghan and Harry to iftar, which is the meal that Muslims eat to break their fast. But the invitation had rather been to Dr. Tedros of the World Health Organization, who then brought them along, as tag-alongs. The source insisted that the British government had not been involved in arranging or facilitating their trip because they are private citizens. In fact, even the Jordanian royal family, who are actually close to the British royal family, didn't entertain or meet with Harry and Meghan, despite having a meeting with Dr. Tedros. Although Meghan and Harry did end up seeing Princess Basma, King Abdullah's aunt, and her daughter Farah. But back to the question of useful idiots. Many are now asking, did the World Health Organization, which, like any other organization, has its own agenda, deliberately use Harry and Meghan to promote a certain narrative? To sway public opinion, perhaps, to indirectly drag the British royal family which is meant to be apolitical, into a heavily political conflict. They did organize the itinerary after all. I mean, Meghan and Harry were just cosplaying humanitarians for the cameras. I wouldn't put it past the World Health Organization, honestly, but if true, it really does show how entirely out of touch it is. Because now in 2026, Meghan and Harry are toast. They have no sway. They don't influence people to do anything other than cancel their Netflix subscriptions, that is. At least if you consider Edward's trip to Germany in 1937, he was king and emperor less than a year prior, which is a real far cry from the spare, who is now technically not even the spare anymore, thanks to Prince William having his own children. And did they really reach out to Meghan and Harry out of the blue? I know there was that donation, financial link, etc., but given what we know about Meghan, could it be that she perhaps did what she does best and strongly hinted at her extreme willingness to accept an invitation should it come her way, just like she did with Pier Paolo and Balenciaga back in Paris Fashion Week? And also, quite frankly, I've even done a whole montage of this in an old video, so I'm not about to do it again, but I put in a series of clips of Meghan lying and claiming confidently that the UN just randomly magically found the TIG and reached out to her saying, "Oh, we're so impressed with what you're doing with your platform. We would love an opportunity to work with you." And she went, yeah, okay, I'll see what I can do.
I had received an email the very next day from a senior advisor at UN Women saying, "We love what you're using your platform to do. Would you potentially want to start working with us?"
Of course, thanks to Tom Bauer, we know that she was the one doing all the chasing. She was the one using people and social climbing, trying to, as I mentioned earlier, weasel her way into these organizations purely for self-promotion, of course. There are no altruistic intentions with Meghan Markle. Of that, Tom Bauer and other authors can assure you. And if you don't believe them, well, ask Pier Paolo of Balenciaga. Whatever the case may be, one thing is for certain: Harry and Meghan are opportunists who do wish to project a certain image, especially when they have nothing else going for them and their commercial ventures are flopping left, right, and center. So perhaps both can be true. Maybe Meghan did push for an invite, and then the World Health Organization said, sure, I guess it couldn't hurt, get more eyeballs, and push our own agenda. Personally, I will stand firm in my belief that as much as other out-of-touch organizations might think that Meghan and Harry are useful idiots who can be used as pawns in the chessboard of the world, I think that that is a sorely mistaken belief. And what the World Health Organization will soon find, as many before them have, is that Meghan and Harry have no sway, they have no influence, they have no gravitas, and that this was purely a waste of time, money, and resources. If there are any winners out of this, it's Meghan and Harry, because they ended up achieving exactly what they have always wanted, which is attention, media headlines, and external validation. But that's just me. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and we'll talk next time. Until then.